If you're a regular reader or viewer of energy media, you'll know that I've often talked with experts about how much more electricity will be required by 2050 to electrify economies. And they generally say 2 to 3 times as much. Now, I've asked the question about British Columbia, where is this electricity going to come from, and still have not received a satisfactory answer. Well, now two researchers have also asked that question, and they're no more satisfied than I am. So I'm going to talk to Professor Roland Clift and Dr. Tony B from the British Columbia Clean Energy Research Institute at UBC about the BC government's CleanBC plan. So welcome to the interview, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm delighted to be here.
Well, look, Roland, let's start with you. You have called CleanBC a fantasy, and their 2030 emissions targets a fantasy. Why is that?
Well, I'll pick up on what you said earlier on about the amount of additional electrical energy which is going to be needed. There's a sort of popular impression that BC runs mainly on electrical power. If you look at the energy actually used in BC, electrical energy is less than 20% of the total. 70% is in the form of hydrocarbons. That's natural gas, things like gasoline and diesel. So your opening remark was absolutely right. If we're going to replace the hydrocarbons by electricity, replace 70% by 20%, then the amount of electricity needed has got to go up by multiples and not by percentages. So when I said it was a fantasy, it seemed to me that the CleanBC plan had not looked at the supply side. Got these lovely ideas for electrifying transport and so on, but the question on where the electricity was come from had not been addressed.
Now, Tony, this question's for you. Last year, it might even have been 2020, Energy Minister Bruce Ralston said that BC would simply buy cheap solar from California. And I interviewed a number of experts from California, from the west coast of the US, about that, who all said, no, that's not a very good idea beyond maybe the short term. And what's your take on that? Using power from the US, cheap California solar to provide all this extra power that BC is going to need?
Well, that is very, very difficult for kind of the forecasting what will be the energy market, say, down the road, say, by 2030. If every country is struggling to secure the renewable energy supplies, do we really know there will be a surplus from California for BC to buy, right? So just like the fossil fuels nowadays, because of the war in Ukraine, you can see the market, the price just kind of inflated, jumped up. So you can imagine by 2030, when every country is trying to decarbonize the economy, they need a renewable energy sources to support that transition. Do we really fund the market for us to buy those cheap solar electricity? I think that is really, we'll have to really look into what we can provide or what we can produce from this Canada. Now they will talk about the security of the energy supply. We will talk about the future security of the renewable energy supply. I think that is very, very important for us to keep in mind.
Now, Roland, this question's for you. BC Hydro has 34 hydro dams, and the total, most of the power they generate comes from hydro dams, and they produce they have 18,000 gigawatts of generating capacity. So if they were going to double that, they would need, I don't know, where would you put another 18,000 gigawatts of generating capacity? You certainly couldn't build another 34 dams. And I think BC Hydro has said that after Site C, they're not even going to build another one.
Well, that's part of the fantasy. Quick calculation, Site C will expand electrical generation in BC by about 9%. So, if you want to look at the multiples of supply, you'd be talking about large numbers of Site C, which isn't going to happen. So you've then got to look at other possible sources. Another quick calculation. To generate the output from Site C, you need 700 wind turbines for BC conditions, typical turbine size. If you're going to do it by solar, we reckon you need about 30 square kilometers of solar panels. You know, these are not small numbers. So to meet the demand for electricity and not expand hydro production, you've got to start looking at enormous investment in other sources, and the investment has got to start now. Because even if you look at the BC plan, they say, I'll quote exactly, new energy needs occur in fiscal year 2029 and capacity needs arise in fiscal year 2032. So we're talking about something like 8-10 years from now. It takes a long time to build these sort of facilities. I mean, for wind turbines, by the time you go through planning, it's not less than 5 years. And then if there are First Nations involved, it's going to be even longer than that. So this sort of crunch only becomes apparent when it's too late to do something about it.
Now, I have a follow-up question for you, Roland. One of the things that strikes me about this situation in British Columbia is we're not talking about it. You don't hear, you very seldom makes it into the media. The government doesn't talk about it any more than it has to. BC Hydro is absolutely mum until they have, in fact, all of the discussions around their integrated resource plan took place behind closed doors, primarily, but they had an expert committee. So it would seem to me that a prerequisite for building out, all of this tremendous amount of electricity capacity, we need to have a public conversation about it.
Absolutely. I find it very frustrating that hasn't happened. That's one of the principal reasons why we published this analysis of the CleanBC plan, to try and get it out into the open and spark a discussion. I could contrast it with elsewhere. Look at what they've done in Nova Scotia, where they've gone about it in a rather very, very much actually more public way and looked at long-term planning in a way that BC doesn't seem to have done. I don't understand either why it's being kept so quiet.
Now, Tony, this question is for you. What role can energy efficiency play in the electrification of the economy?
Well, I think that is very, very critical. We see our population is growing. Also, we see Canada has a plan to ramp up our population. If we keep the per capita energy consumption more or less the same, then we will increase the demand in the energy, particularly in electricity and so on. So how to deal with this shortage? I think the energy efficiency improvement is critical, right? So we cannot find enough of the renewable resources to support our increasing energy demand. Then what do? We have to cut down the consumption, right? Also, that probably is the most effective, rather than to spend 4-10 years to invest to build those new kind of the facility to supply. Why don't we work now, work quickly to improve our energy efficiency? I think that is definitely very, very important.
Yeah, it seems like the kind of ambition that BC is talking about requires a fair amount of urgency. And you don't see that coming out of Victoria. You don't see it from the premier. You don't see it from the energy minister. There's no urgency to really get started in a serious way about this. It's quite it's almost comical if it wasn't such a serious issue. Now, Tony, I have a follow-up question for you, and that is, what about wood pellet exports? Because BC has a very growing pellet export industry, and you're suggesting that those be ended and instead they be diverted to a homegrown biofuel industry.
Well, that's exactly the illustrated the issue. I say down the road, when the renewable energy supply becomes a shortage or the issue, every country will try to fully utilize its renewable resources. Right? Wood pellet or the biomass is one of the renewable energy sources. We should not take it for granted, just export it to support the other countries to decarbonize the economy. If we foresee a shortage, then we should prepare to utilize those renewable resources. Of course, the policy support is critical. Why the wood pellet nowadays are exported to Europe, to Asia, is because there's a demand, there's a market. Also, the price is right over there. So I said definitely the policy support will be critical. So we cannot stop people exporting things, but definitely we need to create a domestic market for those kind of the very, very valuable renewable energy sources.
So Roland, this is the next question is for you. I've interviewed any number of experts about the value of combining renewables and hydro. So the hydro dams essentially act as a big battery for the intermittent renewables. We've got the federal government that's bringing in the Pan-Canadian Grid Council because it wants to do more of this. So is that part of the solution then, is to get BC, involved in a Western Canadian electricity market?
It helps, but it's not anything more than a small step towards a solution. The point really is that when you have intermittent, as non-dispatchable, as it's called, generation like wind and solar, you need some intermediate storage so that you can match the supply to demand on a short-term basis. And hydro is one of the most effective ways of doing that. It's only a way of bringing additional generation into the mix. It doesn't help with what we've got now. By my reading of the figures, the only provinces at the moment which genuinely export low carbon electricity are Quebec and Manitoba. BC actually doesn't on a net basis. So BC is playing a role in helping the generation in, as you say, in southern Alberta and Saskatchewan. But even so, that investment is going to take, as we said, a long time period. So we've really got to get on with investing in the generating capacity and also investing in the linkages which would enable balancing of generation and demand between the provinces. It's part of the picture, but it's not the solution. There is no single solution, in fact.
And Tony, what do you make of nuclear power, particularly small modular reactors? I don't imagine that would be very popular in British Columbia, but it's certainly the federal government's on board. We have some of the provincial governments like Alberta and Saskatchewan on board. Is any chance that that might be an option for British Columbia?
Well, I think, if we really run into a shortage of the energy supply, I think that we go. But remember, we do have other sources, even the fossil fuels, like the blue hydrogen or the natural gas. If we can capture the CO2, we can still continue to use those fossil fuels, right? So I said that is another source to supplement the shortage, right? Nuclear is another issue. Then you need to think about the safety and also, the environmental, potential environmental impact over there, right? So I said definitely is the planning. We do have a lot of the resources in Canada, right? Our population is not very high. We have a huge land resources, but really just like Roland put that, is the planning to meet the supply and the demand and have a good number so we can plan in advance. So we only have 8 or 10 years to go. We cannot mess up, delay this process, then we will be in trouble. Then, when we reach 2030, we will say, oh gosh, no time to implement all those kind of strategies.
Well, gentlemen, thank you very much for your insights. I really appreciate this. And I hope that this interview can advance the conversation in British Columbia. It's, as a British Columbia citizen, I find it enormously distressing that we have this climate change hanging over our heads. We have a plan to address it. And the government, as you say, pretends that its plan is sufficient. And when it clearly there are big holes in it and no plans to address that, and electricity generation is one of the big ones. So thank you very much. Really appreciate this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We hope we can advance that discussion.